There have been different times in this year that different texts have really kind of lived in me as far as like really feeling like they were directing me. And I think where I've come to at this point has been the piece in the Talmud that talks about after the destruction of the temple and how then the people didn't want to have anything else that was built from the material of the temple anymore. So they were like, okay, great. So then we won't do that anymore because we just can't bear it. We're too much in grief. We can't bear to do that. And they say, okay, that's good. But, there was also, there were the libations for, like with the wine. So, okay, well, we won't do the wine anymore because we're too much in grief. And then it comes to, well, but they also had water libations. Are we really going to give up the water? And then they realized that this Rabbi Joshua, was really pushing them to the point of saying, it can't be all grief. We just can't live in all grief. But what he said to do is anytime we're building something, leave a little bit undone. Leave a little bit where we're actually acknowledging the grief, the pain. And of course, last night as I was officiating a wedding, we break the glass. And at that point, we recognize the brokenness. And so we try to contain the grief a little bit. And I'll say that's easier said than done. It's a beautiful teaching because we need reminders of it. And I'll say that after October 7th, I had this compulsion to get to Israel. Like I felt like I just had to be there. And in that time, the teaching that was living in me most was Rav Soloveitchik's, this notion of if there's pain for the Jewish people in one place, the Jewish people in another place feel it, like viscerally feel it. The metaphor is boiling water is poured on the head of a Jew somewhere, and a Jew in another part of the world actually feels it. And that's how I was feeling. And I think it's actually gone a lot both ways in this year, where I think that what I've felt is this deep, deep bond and concern for the Jewish people as a whole. And for that's been pervasive. Part of the experience of being Jewish in the world is actually that experience of joy. And so for me, I want to be able to find ways to name the grief. And by the way, this grief is so complex. And part of the reason I think that this grief is so complex is it's ongoing. And also, there is such a pervasive sense of fear in our grief or in our emotion of what we're experiencing right now that I just think that this is complicated stuff. And if we don't give attention to it, and if we don't name it, and if we don't experience it together with a support, then I think it's going to keep coming up in really weird, awful ways. Not to say that it's going to stave off those weird, awful ways anyway, just to acknowledge it. And I also think that is the way of being able to then experience unabashed joy. When that means acknowledging the grief that we're going through, acknowledging the fear, bringing in the greatest Jewish stories, being able to sing at the top of our lungs at points. It just means going through all of these things together and being able for us to feel like I can keep going in this world because this world is wearying.
It's interesting, Shoshana, I was thinking about the exact same piece of text because I keep going back to that, this idea that not to mourn at all is impossible, but to only mourn is also impossible. And I also think about it, a piece of Torah that I learned from Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum, who recently retired as rabbi of CBST in New York, and was a rabbi and has been a mentor to me. And she was a rabbi there during the AIDS years, the first LGBT congregation, certainly in New York. I'm not sure about the country, and they lost something like 90 members. And so she was doing funerals, 2-3 funerals a week during some of the years. And she said that during that time, when it was Shabbat, no matter how many funerals there had been that week, Shabbat was Shabbat, it wasn't another funeral. And she said, because people actually needed Shabbat, they didn't need another funeral. And I've thought about that so many times over, not just this year, but so many years. And I've also thought a lot over, again, so many years about how the Jewish people have been through a lot. And there were better times in history, and there were worse times, and there were much, much, much worse times. And we had Rosh Hashanah, and we had Pesach, and we had Shabbat in some extremely impossible situations where people didn't know if they were going to survive and didn't survive. And I just really think that sense of being part of that very long arc of Jewish history. I don't know where we are on that arc, but wherever we are, it's part of something and feeling like it's not like we only do Judaism when it's super easy. That has not been the experience. So I think about that a lot.